you need to build your internal definition of material breach or material event or material incident, whatever term you want to use. And I don't recommend the first one because a breach is a legal term. It's not a technologist term. It's not a business term. But defining what material means for you so you can have a consistent interpretation of it, right? Because that's, again, the fuzzy language is there so you can do that. And if you don't have that in your incident response policy, what do we consistently consider material? Then how do you make that judgment? And then, when the regulators come in and they review your documentation and they say, well, we believe this was material, why didn't you report it? You don't have anything to fall back on to say, look, we define material as this and not that. And that's why we made the judgment call as a business not to report. So I think that's the first thing people have to take from this is you need to take the language they gave you for framing about what a material event is, and you need to organizationalize it. Wow, is that even a word?
I think I make them up too.
You have to internalize. You have to synthesize that and then document it and formalize it in your processes, in your policies, in your decision making, and then be consistent about it. Right? That is critical to being defensible. And I hate to put it in that term because we always want to do the right thing for our companies and for our investors. But at the end of the day, as the people who have to respond to these events, it's about defensibility in the decision making and informing our executive leadership and informing our investors and our boards about why something matters or something maybe doesn't rise to that level of materiality. That's my view.
So one thing you said, Sean, that I think this is a good point to make, that, sometimes when there's new regulations that are passed, the governing body isn't always prepared and ready to enforce, right? When you think of GDPR, that was so huge, and they didn't have the resources to be able to go in and do and really.
Ireland did.
Yeah. Well,
New York DFS is another great example of that in the financial sector, right? DFS put out these regulations, but for 3 years, and they went right into COVID too, which was even better timing. They didn't have auditors who knew how to audit the standard that they were assessing. Right. So it took them time to come up to speed and look for interpretations. And Rick made this point when we were talking before the session that, again, this is a law. Well, what happens with laws when laws are proposed? They start out as a philosophical idea, rules, but they don't really mean anything until they're tested in court.
Yeah.
Right? Case law drives the way we interpret these things. And if we don't have case law, it's unproven until somebody decides to say, no, I really don't think that means what you think. And then the courts come back and say, no, it means this. So we've got a gap. Even if we go and we're all compliant by December, it's going to take 2 to 3 years for this to really shake out. And it's likely going to get revised again.
It is. I think that the SEC is ready to go. I mean, they're locked and loaded and they're not playing. Where, sometimes with other regulations, the governing body isn't always prepared for the magnitude of what's about to happen. So I do think that that's another important point to make, that yes, you've got 4 months, but you need to take it really seriously.
Yeah, you do.
They're going to be ready to go. I mean, Rick, you feel the same way?
I absolutely do, because the reality is, like Sean and I were talking about before this meeting, right? So these laws are now interpreted, right? And we're now going to interpret these things. We're going to do what I think is right. And when somebody lands in jail, it's going to make a whole different meaning to cybersecurity, right? When the board of directors starts losing millions and millions and millions in personal fines because they've not followed the governance of this law per se, that they're not, responsible. They don't understand that they're fine. Their disclosures that the year doesn't describe their policies, procedures, and responsibilities. That's going to start costing a lot of people money, right? So I kind of twist on this one, Morris. I apologize. I'm a little twist on this. I got about 8 different feelings going about 8 different ways on this. So, and I would expect a lot of people do.